Welcome to A Turn for the Better. I'm Dick Singh. In this issue, I'm going to touch on something that I think a lot of folks take for granted. When they buy a new chuck, when you bring it home, you're more anxious to try it than you are to clean it up, make sure that everything functions properly, and it's not going to happen the majority of the time. I'm often questioned why my chucks repeat. In other words, I could put a piece back in it. Part of it is how I dedicate it to a set of jaws. In other words, I indicate which way I'm going to put it in and do that again and again. But if the chuck is not set up, it won't do that. So I would like to take the time to go through how I set up a chuck. I've got a brand new Vic Mart 3.5-inch chuck. I consider it probably one of the best chucks on the market. There's many out there and they all do the job, but I just like this chuck for a few reasons, and later on I'll go through what I consider them. Some of the tools I'm going to use today: files. We have something that needs to be filed off a little bit. I've got a 6-inch fine mill file, and maybe just another one that'll get in a place I can't get with that. File card's always good to clean your files. Deburring tool. I have a fine diamond hone, toothbrush, and a spanner wrench. That will be used to put on our insert for our chuck. Our first step we're going to do is clean this thing. To protect against rust during shipment, storage, whatever, it's got cosmoline or grease, some type of grease on it, and we do want to get that off first. We'll take and clean that. I'm going to use mineral spirits, a few rags, and yes, mineral spirits will defat your skin, so it's a good idea to put on some gloves. The first step I did, I took the jaw screws out so that they were not in the way. Got the jaws themselves and the threaded insert, which will be for the back of the chuck, which attaches to your lathe. We're just going to go ahead and clean this up with mineral spirits. I want to get all of this stuff off that I can. I'm now ready to start assembling my chuck. I have spent probably a good 20 minutes, maybe a little longer, cleaning it, checking and making sure of what I have to work with. And I did find a couple things. Now, one thing that I would like to say, all chucks are susceptible to this, not just one, any of them. If you look right here, there is a piece of pickup or chip weld. In other words, when the cutter went through there, it stuck a piece of the shaving to the steel. Also, there's a dent right here, which I would say came from handling, whether it be dropped in the plant, whether the mailman dropped it, whatever. In other words, something has hit. Both of these will not allow the jaws to set tight against the slides. I feel a lot of people are a little hesitant to touch a piece of precision equipment like a chuck, and rightfully so. If you do, use caution, make sure of what you're taking off, and only take off our defect or our problem. Okay, now on this particular one, I'm going to take the tip of a file and knock out that little chip. I'm just going to push it out because it's okay. Now I'm going to take a diamond and I'm laying it flat on our jaws and just going to take off both of those little dents. As you can see, this is a fine diamond, and I'm not taking off much of anything. As you can see, this is now down to the surface, as is this, and I'm done with that slide. I have gone over all 4 of my slides. Now, I really haven't removed any metal at all other than the little dent and the piece of pickup. Other than that, everything is flat. One thing you want to be aware of also, occasionally when they tap a hole, it has what they call pullback. In other words, it will raise the surface around a hole. Now, these have been countersunk or chamfered, so they're nice and clean, and as you can see, none of them really have been pulled, because when I used the stone on them, it would have shown as a shiny spot. Are all chucks susceptible to this? I think so. But one thing you want to do now, cleanliness is next to godliness when you start putting one of these things together. I like a clean lathe, and definitely when it comes to putting your parts on, you want to make sure that there's nothing interfering with the way that these jaws seat on the slides. Now, on the bottom of the jaw is an embossment, which sets in this little groove. In other words, that is what locates and helps position that jaw. You want to make sure that there is no dirt, grit, grease, or anything else in those spots. And also, I'm going to take, and just in the area that the slide matches to here, I'm checking and I'm good. So I want to make sure that there was nothing on that, so it will match our slides. Now, when they make these chucks, especially the jaws, they're made as one piece, and then they use a milling saw to come in and cut it into 4 pieces. So initially it was turned as one. Now, where this saw came through, these have been cleaned up a little bit, but there are Monday mornings and Friday afternoons. So I like to just take a file and clean those surfaces to make sure that there's no burrs on them. Another nice thing about doing this and making sure they're clean, when you're using that chuck, if you've got too sharp of an edge on some of this stuff and you bump it with your hand, it becomes a meat slicer. If there's nothing to cut you, it may wrap your knuckle, but it's not going to butcher you up. Now, right on that corner, I like to take one stroke, just to break that corner so it doesn't do anything if I bump into it. Now, I'm not going to touch this surface unless there's something in there that demands it. One of the other spots that I always look for, and this is basically the reason that I use this set of jaws, these holes are drilled before they're machined, which means the edges of these holes get burrs on them. I'm sure that sometimes maybe they won't interfere with the wood, but again, they'll cut you. So I just take a little machinist file and clean that surface up. Is it really necessary? Not unless you don't feel like getting cut. Another spot you want to make sure is on the holes. If there's anything rough around them, you could take a chamfering tool and go in and clean them. These are beautiful. They've already been chamfered for me. In fact, everything on these particular jaws, other than that hole, were pretty good. So we're back to getting ready to put this particular jaw onto our slide. Now our slides are numbered. This is important as the jaws and the slides have to be on the same number system. If they don't, they will not make a concentric chuck. When I get ready to put these on, my final wipe is with my finger. That will pick up anything that's on there. Make sure your groove and your slide is right. As stupid as this may sound, make sure that your holes are clean. Sometimes there may be a little something in there that's going to disrupt the fit of your jaw. I do not tighten them all the way down yet. Just making sure that everything goes together nice. I'm going to continue around the chuck and put on the rest of the jaws. Okay, I've installed all the jaws, but I have not tightened them all down yet. They are in there with a little bit of play yet. Okay, I've also closed the chuck up to where it's, I would say, close to being its proper concentricity. Okay, in the center is a hole which was drilled. I measured it and it's roughly 11 millimeters. Now I don't have 11 millimeter drill, but 7/16 is 4/1000 larger than 11 millimeters. So I think we can probably use something 7/16, which the Tommy bar that comes with the chuck happens to be real close to that. So I'm going to put that in the hole and lightly tighten the chuck and make sure all the jaws come up to that. Okay, everything looks and feels quite good. Now I'm going to take and tighten my screws. Okay, everything seems to be snugged up quite well. Seems to grip that very nice. Now I'm going to tighten them up tight. Another one of my little things that I can never leave alone, I've shortened up my Allen wrenches. If I go to tighten these up with this wrench, the wrench itself being so long wants to twist or rotate. With a shorter one, it's a much easier, no movement in the wrench itself, no twist. And I feel as though I get a tighter tightness on my screws. Now there's something else that I look at here. When you use the chuck, chances are you're going to be using the face of the jaws along with whether it be the outside in an expanding mode or compression mode on the inside. This particular chuck is machined at the base of the jaws, and I want to make sure that none of my screws were protruding above the surface, which they're not. If I do a tenon, there's nothing that says I can't use a flat tenon against the face of the jaws on this chuck rather than the outside end. So I would just want to make sure that that surface was all in a parallel plane, and they are. Okay, I guess it's time to get our insert bushing into it. Again, we want to make sure that this surface has no imperfections on it, and it's pretty good. Everything is smooth. Now the surface that matches to it, also you want to make sure it's clean. Where this hole is, which sometimes you'll get a burr, that one's pretty good. So I'm happy with it. The best way I know to clean threads are strictly use a toothbrush or a small brass brush, but toothbrush works so fine. Make sure that there's nothing against those two surfaces. Okay, now it goes right in nice and tight. Now the Tommy bar that they send is used to tighten that. Demonstrating, I get on a lot of different lathes and I have a lot of different bushings to fit whatever lathe I happen to be on. And changing that all the time, I use a spanner wrench, which goes on through that hole and breaks it loose or tightens it. It's a much better fit than what a Tommy bar is, as far as I feel. I like to put it in a wooden vise, or at least have jaws that are protected on a normal vise, and hold it. Take a dead blow hammer, just give it a light tap. If everything's clean, it's going to already be seated, so you're not going to have to put a lot of hammering on it. Now there's one other feature on this. There's a screw there. Okay, you can take and tighten that screw tight, which will jam it against the back side of the chuck. The reason that screw is there is that today's lathes have reversing switches on them. And if you don't have a way of locking this, sometimes the inserts will unscrew from the chuck, and say you got an impact of some kind, like God forbid a catch or something of that nature. I'm often asked why I like this chuck. Well, I think it's one of the best chucks made. Not taking away from any of the other chucks. I think there are other chucks that'll probably do everything this one will. The only thing that I really like, number one, the machining on it is really, really great. The dovetails, everything are just perfect. It's a heavy chuck. I think that on a small lathe, chuck acts like a flywheel and actually helps that lathe to keep running smooth, especially if it's a cut that's not uniform all the way around. The back is covered. There's no chips get into the gears. It has indexing holes either in the back or on the sides. The inserts, like I said before, I have a lot of them, and I've never had one that didn't run true. But probably one of the greatest things, two of the greatest things, it's easy to put a wrench in that chuck. It's positive. It's straightforward. I have no problem with it. And one of the other things is it has a large range. Some of the chucks only have maybe a 1/2 of an inch range. This one will pull a full 1.5 inches or maybe a little more. It has many different types of jaws available for it. What more can I say? Now, one of the things that I do, my main handle, I cut down because it keeps me nice and close. I find it easy to locate my handle into the chuck easier than when I'm a long ways away. Now I'm sure somebody's going to say, well, what do you do if you have a platter? I just grab another one. I have a long one also, but I don't find that as convenient to use as my short one. Another thing, there are plastic washers on the market that people use. They put them between this surface and the spindle on the lathe, and it's made so that you don't lock your chuck up on the lathe. My machinist background, that would have been a total no-no. the tighter your chuck fits to your lathe, the better off you are. You lose vibration, everything trues up. It's meant to be that way. That's why these surfaces are clean and the mating one to the lathe so that they do fit together tight. I don't have a problem with it locking. If it doesn't lock, I just put the key in the chuck, hold a hand wheel, and pop it with my hand, and I've not had a problem taking a chuck off, period. There's another little accessory that comes with the chuck. It's a screw thread. Okay, the purpose of this is to drill a hole into your block, your work block, and screw it on here so that you only have, like starting a bowl, you only have one hole in the inside of the bowl. Okay, now this surface is held by the chuck, and the head actually goes on the back side of the jaws. You bring your jaws together and make sure that it's tight against the back side of the jaws, and then when you screw your bowl or whatever your workpiece is on here, it goes up against the face, and that can't come out because of the head which holds it to the back side of the jaws. We spent a little time getting our chuck ready. I consider it'll run just as good as anything right now. I hope you've got some information that'll be useful to you. And treat these things like the piece of fine equipment they are. When you do change jaws, clean them before you put the other set on. Take your time. This chuck has never done anything to you. Don't do anything to it. Thank you, and I'm Dick Singh for Woodworking at Home.